Hello, my name is Hal Freeman. As the president of Hollywood Family Entertainment, I'd like to thank you for purchasing this video. I think it will provide you with information crucial to your safety during a major earthquake. In addition to the video itself, we have included a personal survival booklet inside the box which summarizes the main points of the video. The booklet will also serve as a convenient reference tool when preparing your family and your home for an emergency. Though the suggestions expressed in the film are based on research and interviews with professionals, they are ultimately our own best advice to you and should not be regarded as the last word on the subject of earthquakes. If by the end of the video you have acquired more confidence in your ability to safely care for yourself and those you love during and after an earthquake, then we have provided you with the service you deserve. At this time, I would like to thank the following staff and crew members and acknowledge their dedication for the many hours and the hard work in the making of this project. Claire Casano, Chris Wilson, Patrick Cabarrus, Derek Scott, Sherry Freeman, Matthew Murray, and my granddaughter, Kathleen Elizabeth. And a special thanks to Shelley Duvall for making this all possible. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. As a professional in the entertainment industry, I've chosen to make my home in California. Like any choice, there are benefits and drawbacks. The benefits are obvious: the wonderful climate, the beaches and mountains, and the fact that my work is here. There are also drawbacks. One of them is California is earthquake country. Most of us don't like to think about what would happen to our homes, our property, our families, or ourselves in the event of a major California earthquake. But with scientists predicting a big one, a quake measuring 7.0 or greater on the Richter scale, within the next 50 years, this is an issue we must take seriously, very seriously. What we don't know can hurt us. To prepare for earthquakes, we should understand them. Here at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, seismologists study and measure the effects of these colossal Earth movements.
I'm talking with Dr. Kate Hutton, staff seismologist and spokesperson for the Caltech Seismology Department. Dr. Hutton, could you give us a simple description of what causes an earthquake?
Well, it all comes down to the fact that the Earth's crust, or the outer part of the Earth, is broken up into about a dozen pieces that we call plates. And the layer below that, the mantle of the Earth, is, although it's solid on the short term, it actually can flow on a million-year time scale. So the plates are moving. And where they're interacting at their edges, if they're converging or sliding past each other horizontally, there's often strain built up or deformation of the crust, which is the cause of the earthquakes that we feel.
Isn't it true that California rests above the juncture of two of these plates?
California is on the boundary between the Pacific Plate on one side and the North American Plate on the other. And the relative motion is about an inch per year in a horizontal direction.
So it is actually the movement of these two plates
That cause the earthquakes, that's right.
Now, I understand that seismologists generally agree the next major quake will be the result of a slip along the San Andreas Fault.
That's the most probable case. Our largest earthquakes in California are usually about 7.5 to 8 on the Richter scale, maybe a little larger. Like the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco and the 1857 earthquake in Southern California. Those quakes are expected to be on the San Andreas Fault. And of course, we're having smaller earthquakes every few years, which damage smaller areas. We have to be prepared for those also. But basically, if we were prepared for the large one, we'll certainly be prepared for any of the other ones that might come along.
And you expect this quake to be 7 or greater on the Richter scale?
Probably 7.5 or greater. Now, of course, we're having smaller earthquakes all the time, and even a small earthquake, if it strikes a populated area, can cause damage. But the great earthquake on the San Andreas is something that, we think is inevitable and would cover a fairly large area with damage. So we're worried about that one, trying to get people to prepare for that one.
Now, it seems like we have had a lot of activity, earthquake activity, since the October 1st Whittier Narrows quake. Is there some reason for that?
Well, I don't think that the activity really is any higher than the average. I think the press has been sensitized by the October 1st earthquake, and they're picking up a lot more earthquake information that they otherwise might ignore.
Can you explain a little bit how the Richter scale works?
Well, it's an arbitrary number which is intended to indicate the size of the earthquake, like the wattage of a light bulb, which is independent of where you are. It's based on a standard instrument, and if a quake that's a magnitude 3 has a 1 millimeter pen motion on that instrument, then a 4 at the same distance would have a 10 millimeter pen motion, and a 5 would have a 100 millimeter pen motion, and so forth. It goes up a factor of 10 for each point, so that the whole range of earthquakes, from the smallest that we can feel up to the largest earthquakes ever recorded, can be expressed in a convenient range of numbers.
Dr. Hutton, thank you for your explanations. Now, I know the people watching the video not only want to understand earthquakes, but want to be able to be prepared for them. How important do you think preparation is?
Oh, I think preparation is very important. Preparation really comes in two parts. And one, the public really never sees, but that involves the building codes and legislation to remove old structures and reinforce old structures. And the result of California having had this legislation for a long period of time is that most houses and modern buildings are fairly safe in earthquakes. So a person's chances of getting killed in an earthquake are rather small. But the public will certainly have to deal with lack of utilities, lack of grocery stores to conveniently run down to, maybe lack of firefighting and medical services for a while. So being prepared in that sense to be self-sufficient for 72 hours is extremely important in preparing for a large earthquake.
Can we take a look at some of the seismographic equipment you use here?
Sure.
These seismographs we see here correspond to various locations around the state.
Right. Each one is recording the ground motion at an individual place, like Pasadena, Riverside, China Lake, San Clemente Island. So we have an idea what the activity is all over the southern part of California.
And how are these connected to Caltech?
Most of them are by microwave link, but some are telephone line.
Now, this noise we hear all around here, I guess that has to do with these machines that are constantly in operation.
Well, the machines are constantly making noise, but the ticking stuff that you see on here is time code that allows us to verify that the date and time of the recording was made.
And these are spaces, 1 minute spaces? Or
Yeah, these ticks are 1 minute apart.
I see.
The drum rotates once every 15 minutes, and the pen moves from one side to the other during one day. So we change the paper every morning at 8 o'clock.
Within the next 50 years, along one of the many fault lines in California, we can expect a truly destructive earthquake. 250,000 people may be injured, with property damage totaling more than $17 billion. One way or another, it will affect everyone. Will you be ready for it? The following dramatization of a major earthquake can help you be as prepared as possible when the real event occurs. Watch how this family reacts when an earthquake strikes their home. This family is prepared. These people knew ahead of time what they would need to do when a quake struck. You saw they were in a house, but you would follow the same general procedure in any building. Now, in greater detail, here is a review of the steps to follow. Step 1. Seek shelter from falling objects. In a doorway where the building structure is the strongest, beneath a sturdy table or chair, or even beneath a bed if you find yourself in a bedroom. Do not run outside. You will not have enough time to reach a space free of falling objects such as roof tiles or electrical wires. Move quickly and try not to move to a shelter more than a few feet from your initial position. That's why it's important to know in advance, both at home and at work, where to go when an earthquake strikes. Step 2. Shut off the gas valve. In your house, condominium, or apartment, know in advance where your gas meter and shutoff valve are located. If you smell gas or believe, given a situation of extreme damage, that gas is leaking, you must shut off the valve in order to minimize the possibility of explosion and fire. Use a wrench to give this valve a 1/4 turn in either direction, left or right, so that it is crosswise to the pipe. The gas is now shut off. Step 3. Shut off water valves. Water can usually be turned off at valves beneath the faucets where the leak occurs. But in the event of more serious damage, you may need to turn off the main water valve. Again, wherever you live, find out in advance where the main valve is located. Step 4. The switch box or fuse is a protection against electrical problems. In the event of power outages or surges, a circuit may break. If you live where there are circuit breaker switches, like these, know how to flip the breaker switches. Or, if you live where there is a fuse box, you should know how to replace the fuses. Make sure you have a few extra ones on hand. Now, if you are driving during a quake, you should pull your car to the side of the road and stop as soon as traffic allows you to safely do so. Remain inside your car. You're safer there. You'll want to avoid stopping on or under bridges or overpasses which could collapse, trees, street lamps, or high-tension wires. And for those of you waiting for your husband or wife to come home from work after the quake, don't panic when she isn't there at the usual time. Given the blocked streets and highways with which motorists will undoubtedly have to contend, the drive home will be longer by at least several hours. If you're outside when a quake hits, move to an open area clear of falling objects, or seek shelter beneath a park bench or bus bench. Now that we've discussed how to respond during and immediately following a quake, we'll talk about preparations you can start making now, before a quake occurs. It may be 72 hours before professional help is available, but you can expect to be on your own for at least a week. Police, firefighters, and paramedics will concentrate on areas hardest hit with damages. In distant areas, such as Alaska or the deserts in California, it may be even longer. Prepackaged survival kits are available commercially, but it's just as easy to prepare your own. You can start by stocking up on canned food and other emergency items, most of which can be obtained inexpensively in your local Safeway market. Choose canned or dehydrated foods such as soup, stew, and vegetables that require little water or cooking in their preparation. Plan your emergency menu. Think about what you might wish to eat. Include baby food or pet food if you have animals at home. Most canned goods have a shelf life of 6 months to 1 year. Don't forget to rotate your emergency food supplies. You can check the expiration dates, which are found on the label or on the cans themselves. If you need help picking the types of food best suited for storage during an emergency, just ask your Safeway store manager. He'll be glad to assist you. And Sparkletts bottled water will last 3 to 5 years before you need to rotate it. As frequently as we all go shopping, it doesn't take much effort if you stock a little at a time. Watch for your weekly store specials and be price conscious, especially on canned goods, such as tuna, beans, corn, and peas. And don't forget that refrigerated or frozen foods will remain edible for 3 to 5 days even after the power is out, as long as you keep the refrigerator door shut to keep the temperature down. Tools are also essential. In addition to a can opener for your food, you'll need a wrench to shut off utilities. Perhaps a knife, a saw, some rope, and a fire extinguisher. A first aid kit is essential, and a portable radio is also invaluable. A deck of cards is small and will entertain children. Know in advance which local radio stations are set up to broadcast emergency information, such as an all-news station like KNX 1070, or KFWB 98 AM in Southern California, or KCBS 74 AM in Northern California. Depending on space, you may want to consider stocking cooking items, like a portable barbecue, propane fuel, liquid heat or sterno, a bag of charcoal briquettes, and a lantern. All of the food I've stocked is enough for 8 adults and 1 baby for a week. But of course, each one of your requirements will differ. You see the canned goods I just bought, corn, peas, and a lot of soup. The large Campbell soup cans are the most economical and will go a long way. And keep your spare batteries in the refrigerator for a longer life, so you won't have to rotate them as often. Finally, the most important item in your survival kit, water. Adults drink at least 1/2 gallon of liquid per day, so you should store several gallons of water for each person who will be with you. If you don't have the storage space for bottled water, you still have a good clean water supply here in your hot water heater. Use this nozzle to fill up empty jugs as water is needed. You have additional fresh water here in your refrigerator in the form of ice cubes. And oddly enough,
In here, the water in the tank is as clean as the water from a faucet. However, avoid drinking water from the bowl. And don't drink water from either the tank or the bowl if it has been treated with chemical additives. If water and sewage systems are severely disrupted, or if you simply need more water, there are several methods of making sure it's clean. The simplest way is to boil water, assuming you still have electricity or gas. If you have commercial purification tablets such as Halazone or Globaline, just follow the instructions on the packet. If not, you can purify water yourself using household bleach. First, filter the water through a clean cloth or handkerchief to remove any sediment, floating matter, or glass particles. Make sure the active ingredient is sodium hypochlorite, regular household bleach. Don't use solutions which contain any other active ingredients. They may be poisonous. If the water you're treating looks clean to you, use this formula. 1 quart, 2 drops. 1 gallon, 8 drops. 5 gallons, 1/2 teaspoon. If the water appears cloudy or murky, then use this formula. 1 quart, 4 drops. 1 gallon, 16 drops. 5 gallons, 1 teaspoon. Mix the water and the chlorine by stirring or shaking. Then let it stand for half an hour. You should still be able to detect a slight odor of chlorine.
you should store the kit in a place that will be easy to get to. One good spot is the garage. Another is a closet near the outside of a house, which is more easily accessible than a central closet. Ultimately, the thoroughness of your kit may be determined by the amount of storage space you have available. Although everyone should store water, you may have to exclude some of the other items. What you exclude must depend on your own needs and available space.
The items in your car kit should include a flashlight, a container of water, a blanket, road flares, some non-perishable food, enough to survive on, and a small first aid kit which should include any special prescription medications you or your family members may need if you're trapped away from home.
Now we'll discuss some simple methods of making your house or apartment safer during an earthquake. Because after all, if you've prepared it properly, it's the best place to be.
Small cracks in your foundation could split during a quake. It's best to take care of these now, before they become dangerous. Breakable items such as these can be dangerous, should a quake rattle them out of the cupboards. Make sure that the hinges on your kitchen cabinets are designed to keep the doors firmly closed. If you have a large freestanding mirror such as this one, it's an excellent idea to secure it firmly to the wall. Otherwise, you have a potential danger of shattered glass if it smashes to the floor. Anything can be secured to the walls to safeguard you and your family. To prevent tall, heavy objects like this bookcase from toppling over, simply locate a wall stud and drill 2 small holes, one in the wall and another in the back of your furniture. Insert a closed-eye stud in each hole and connect the 2 with a strong piece of wire. This way, your furniture will stay upright and safe. It is particularly important to remove heavier objects from walls or shelves in an infant or small child's room.
Windows can shatter during a quake. Some modern homes have safety glass that will prevent this. There is also a protective film coating available that invisibly coats the glass. This thin, transparent sheet eliminates the danger of flying glass shards. We've also mentioned that if you live in an apartment or condo, as millions of Californians do, you should ask the landlord where the utility controls, gas, water, and electricity, are located. Your landlord may already have a quake plan for the entire building. Now, if you live far from condominiums or apartments in the California desert, or in rugged country in Alaska or Nevada, it's even more important to be self-sufficient.
In order to review the preparedness information we've discussed already, we've come to the Los Angeles office of the American Red Cross. I'm talking with Peggy Bruchet, coordinator of earthquake preparedness, and Ralph Wright, Public Relations Officer for the American Red Cross. Ms. Boucher, assuming an earthquake was to occur right now, what are you going to do right away during the first few moments and, say, within the first 15 minutes afterwards?
Well, if I'm fortunate enough during the quake to be at a nice desk like this, what I'm going to do is get underneath it and hang on to it and stay covered there to protect myself from falling objects during the quake. If I didn't have a desk like this nearby, I would try to get under a table or into a doorway, very carefully braced in the doorway, and stay there until the shaking stops. After the quake, to me, the first two urgent things to take care of is to first check myself and make sure I'm okay, and then check any other people around me for injuries, to get those taken care of right away. The second most urgent thing is to check for fires. Now, the reason that we say that is because following a major earthquake, we know that we won't be able to get the fire department and the paramedics and people immediately due to telephone problems, due to the fact that those agencies will be swamped with requests. So you need to take care of injuries and fires right away when they are still small enough that you personally can deal with them before they get out of hand.
Now, Mr. Wright, assuming an earthquake of 7.0 or greater on the Richter scale occurred on a weekday between 8 and 5 in the LA Civic Center, millions of people would be in desperate straits, not only in the city area but in outlying areas. What sorts of facilities or operations do you have to handle a disaster of that magnitude?
The Red Cross works together with all the other public safety agencies. Now, the real question is, how do you deal with broken families? Not broken in the sense of marriage, but broken in the sense of a son's in a school, the daughter's at another place, the wife's at home or at work, and the husband's someplace else. That's going to take a long time to get together when you have the problems of traffic, when you have the problems of non-telephone usage, because communications will go down, probably through overuse of communications, not because of the fact that the system won't be able to function. Consequently, the role of the Red Cross is to work in conjunction with all these units in advance to get them prepared. And then at the time of the major quake, working with all the public safety agencies in providing shelter, providing mass care, which is food and other type of assistance. But that will take time. That may take 72 hours in some places. It may even take a week. In dealing with the major problems, you go first, and then you gradually work your way out. A major quake in this area, if it closes off the railroads, the airports, and the road system, is much more of a problem than if the quake occurs and only affects the buildings and you still have the ability to bring supplies in. This will be determined by a plan which has been worked on by the county, by the city, by the state OES, Office of Emergency Services, and by the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
What sorts of operations do schools have, or does the Red Cross have in conjunction with schools?
Each school district has its own disaster plan, and people really need to find out what their specific plans are. There are various levels of preparedness currently in the schools, but they have become much better prepared since January of this year, when a state bill went into effect that requires every school to have an earthquake preparedness plan and to have their children participate in the drop drills to practice for during an earthquake. I think everyone is aware from the general news that's been going on of how tight school budgets currently are. It's very hard for them to cover all the things that they need to do. And so in terms of actually having supplies, that is something that's more difficult for them. Many schools have done very innovative things like have each student bring in a little bit of a personal preparedness kit, or have bake sales or can drives or things to raise money or to actually bring the supplies into the schools provided by parents. But as I say, most schools simply have not had the budgets to do the kind of supplying that is needed yet.
In terms of your preparedness statewide, not just in Southern California, can you give us some sort of an idea what kinds of plans Northern California has?
In the San Francisco area in particular?
Yes.
Most people are very aware of the danger up there, of course. They are very well prepared also in San Francisco. They're doing very similar things to what we are here. And in fact, there is an organization up there that is a combination of Red Cross and city government and the major corporations who twice each year put on seminars on corporate preparedness. they know that they have an even tougher situation than we have here because the peninsula is accessed almost exclusively by bridges, and they are much more likely to have all of their transportation cut off than we are in Southern California. And so that's the eventuality that they are preparing for. And they do disaster drills based on major earthquakes. So I would say that their preparedness is very similar to what we are doing here.
But I don't suppose realistically the people in California during an earthquake can really expect for the response of the Red Cross or any sort of public organization to be so rapid.
I think the thing that's important for people to realize is that in this earthquake, the response agencies will be victims, just as the rest of the community are. Right. And the same transportation problems and communication problems that everyone has will also affect our ability to respond. You know, for instance, in the downtown area, we've talked about business self-sufficiency there. In those areas where there are a lot of high-rise, we expect there to be a lot of glass and rubble in the streets that will essentially prevent emergency vehicles from moving in those areas. So it's that kind of reason that we tell people that they need to be self-sufficient, because even when we get all of our volunteer teams up and ready to go, we are still going to be suffering from those same problems that will prevent us from being everywhere that we need to be.
Now, I understand that people shutting off their gas during the recent Whittier Narrows earthquake turned out to be a major problem. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it seems that the one message that people have really gotten about earthquake preparedness is, after an earthquake, turn off your gas. Unfortunately, they've not gotten that that message needs to be qualified, which is only turn off your gas if you smell a gas leak or if you can see that you have broken or disconnected pipes. The reason for that is that the gas company then has to come back and restore all that service. They have to turn them back on, they have to relight your pilots. It's going to take them a long, long time to do all that. And you're right, what happened in the Whittier Narrows earthquake is that in the greater Los Angeles basin that was affected by that quake, about 20,000 people turned off their gas, and 16,000 of those did not have any gas leak. There was no need for them to shut it off, and it was days before they could get their service restored.
Now, with all this that you do for people, not only in the United States, but around the world, I'm sure you require a lot of volunteers, and I'm sure there are people out there who are interested in volunteering. What is it that people can do for you?
Well, the first thing that people can do for us is get personally prepared. The reason that's a benefit to us is it means that, you know, the more people who can take care of themselves in a disaster, the less we will be needed, the less overwhelmed we will be in a major catastrophe. After that, the next thing they can do is come and volunteer. Red Cross is very dependent on volunteers. I think we have something like 100 volunteers for every paid staff member. That is what keeps us going, and most of the people that you meet in a Red Cross shelter will be volunteers. We need more of them.
But we're not only asking for people to volunteer for the Red Cross, we'd like people to volunteer in their local communities with other organizations, including the Neighborhood Watch. Because if a person lives on a particular street and the other folks go to work and he's retired and stays at home, he's the perfect person to be head of a Neighborhood Watch who'll take care of all these homes when an earthquake takes place. So we're not just interested in volunteers for ourselves, but interested in a total community response in times of disaster.
We also want people to remember to support the Red Cross year-round, because it takes us constant preparedness to be ready for those disasters, and it's not only in time of disaster that we need funds, we need them to be ready and stay ready all the time. So that's another way they can help us out.
And there are some things we don't want people to do. And that's the crazy thing, but we really aren't interested in used clothing. And in every major disaster that we have, clothing comes in. And sure, there's a need for some clothing, but the great amounts that come in are not usable normally by the disaster victims, and they just clog the system. Also, people send things to be used. In Mexico City, the tarmac of the airport was totally covered with supplies, much of which was never used because it was never asked for. The disaster emergency response agencies know what are needed. And so if people would contact us first and say, do you need 3,000 sheets of certain type of Mylar, we may be able to use it because we may need it. But then again, if we don't need it, don't send it because it just gets in the way.
And a disaster is also an economic disaster. You compound that if you send goods into the area. It's much better to provide money to the disaster victims to buy from their local suppliers, because that puts money back into that economy and helps people repair and recover. Whereas if you send in enough clothing for everybody in that community for the next year, all the clothing vendors in that community have just gone out of business. It makes a secondary economic disaster, and that's a terrible thing to inflict on that community. We know that's not what people intend, and if they understood that that's why Red Cross asks for funds rather than contributions of materials, that they would understand that, and that's what we would get.
I'd like to thank both of you very much. Now, I understand you have a radio room here which you regard as something of the center of operations around here. Could we take a look at that?
Sure, we can go over and look at the radio operations room.
I don't know if you have any input there. Sheriff's Department. Shoot.
Ironically, as we've been looking at this radio room emergency area, the PSA jet near Paso Robles, California, has just gone down.
Slow down. Yes. Slow down.
Now that we've found out something about the services that the Red Cross provides, we've come to a Disaster Preparedness Division office at Old Fire Station Number 6 in Los Angeles to find out about the services the fire department provides following an earthquake. I'm speaking with Fire Chief Frank Borden of the Los Angeles Fire Department. Now, Chief Borden, I guess it goes without saying that following an earthquake, the fire department is required to respond to more than simply firefighting sorts of disasters.
That's right, Matt. What we do on a normal day-to-day basis will be magnified by 100 times probably during a major earthquake. We're responding to things like fires, building collapses, hazardous materials releases, injuries, all types of emergencies. Matter of fact, we'll be overwhelmed. Our fire department and the surrounding departments will be overwhelmed. If we consider the ratio of firefighters to the number of people in the community, it's 1 to 3,500. And talking about paramedics, it's 1 to 35,000. So you can see that we'll be overtaxed. Because of that, we're emphasizing self-help programs in the community where people can take care of themselves and take care of their own problems if they're small. We'll respond to the major problems where we can save the most lives.
Can you tell us a little about those self-help programs?
Well, what we'll be doing is dividing up the program from a general awareness campaign using the media to very specific types of programs, community volunteer response team programs, where we'll train a group of approximately 25 people to extinguish small fires and to treat first aid and to do a damage assessment and take care of the area around their own community.
Now, this sort of program is something that the person watching this video can get involved in?
Oh, definitely. Matter of fact, we are right after the first year preparing programs for the community, and they can call our fire department and we can set them up for a program of all types. We have neighborhood block programs to this community program that I was talking about.
Now, given a disaster of this proportion like you've been outlining here, there must be a number of situations that the fire department can't respond to. They must be overwhelmed, like you say, with disasters. What sort of a system of priority do you set up following an earthquake?
What our City of Los Angeles Fire Department, in the event of an earthquake, and it could be of any magnitude, we go into our earthquake emergency mode, is what we call it. And our first priority is to establish procedures to check in by radio of all our fire companies and ambulances to make sure that they're available for response. Our first real priority is to assess the damage by ground and air to see where the damage is, what type of problems do we have to deal with, and that gives us the priority for our response.
What's the most common sort of emergency that you respond to following an earthquake?
I would say that we'll be running into many injuries of all types, fires, there'll be chemical releases, there'll be a variety of things, but I think probably the most common would be injury and fire.
And I gather you must call in additional staff following an earthquake as well?
Yes, our department has a recall system where we recall off-duty personnel to come in and activate our apparatus and be ready to respond. Our people have been trained for the past several years in a family preparedness program, and the reason for that is we felt that if our firefighters felt and paramedics felt that their families were taken care of, that they'd be more available and readily available to respond back to the city and to assist in the major tasks that we have to accomplish.
Now, a major portion of this video has been concerned with what people should do during and following an earthquake. Now, let's assume that a person out there watching the video has neither knowledge of CPR or first aid, yet is confronted with a number of persons around him who are injured and in need of medical attention immediately. What can this assumedly ignorant person do?
There's some basic things that just about anybody could do with a little bit of training to save a family member, to save a life or prevent further injury. One of the portions of the program that we'll be teaching in the near future is what we call creative first aid.
And we have a fellow here today, Paramedic Supervisor Steve Lilienthal, who would be glad to show you what those things are.
Matt, I'd like to introduce you to Paramedic Supervisor Steve Lilienthal. Steve?
Hi, how are you?
Steve is one of our primary instructors in first aid, but not only that, he teaches what we call creative first aid. And Steve, why don't you tell us something about what you do?
I'll tell you, it would work a lot better if I just took you over to my section and showed you what I did and put a little demonstration on. How would that be?
Good.
Okay, Isabel, can you come in here, please? Remove some of these things that we'll be using. And we'll go through some of these basic procedures that people can use at home. Okay, here on the table, please. Okay, and just lay back. Okay, the first thing you want to do, if you find somebody down, you want to check the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. To do that, you place one hand on the chin, one hand on the forehead, and you tilt the head back, which will open the airway. It gets the tongue off the back of the throat, which can block the airway. Then you can listen for breathing. If there's no breathing, you'd want to do rescue breathing. And I stress that you take a first aid class at your American Red Cross or at a local hospital near your home that will give you that information on rescue breathing. Next thing you want to do is check for circulation. And you check the carotid pulse by putting a hand right across the throat, right underneath the chin, and lightly feeling. And I do suggest, go ahead, try it yourself. Put a hand right on your throat, right here, and you'll feel your pulse. It's called the carotid pulse. Next step we want to do is a complete head-to-toe exam to check for other injuries, injuries that you can't see. And to do that, you start at the head, you feel the head. If you're feeling for any deformities. If your patient is conscious, ask them, does it hurt? Go down one side of the body at a time. Move it a little bit. See if you can get any pain if they're conscious. You then start on the chest, pushing down, seeing if there's any movement, too much movement, or any pain from your patient. You then can check the abdomen and push on the abdomen a little bit, seeing if there's any pain. If they have pain, then you want to be suspicious that there could be internal injuries. Push on the hips, coming down, feeling for any movement or any cracking sounds that you may feel. Coming down and looking too. If you feel something unusual, go ahead. Get a pair of scissors and cut the pants up. Get it so you can see it. Okay, after our initial assessment, you come back to the areas that you note where you feel there's a problem. In this case here, I found some bleeding. It was coming through the blouse. Also, there was some pain when I palpated the area. So as I expose it, I find there's a laceration or a cut on her arm with a possibility of a broken arm. Now, what I want to do is I want to control that bleeding. Some of the ways that you can control the bleeding, items found around the home, is a sanitary napkin. Putting the sanitary napkin over in firm place, holding pressure there, you can control that bleeding. What I suggest is you don't dab it, look at it, go back, cover it, and dab it again. Keep pressure on there. Very important. Now you want to hold that dressing down with something. There's several different things that you can use that you have around your home. For instance, a man's necktie. Very good for that. You can wrap it around there, it'll hold that dressing in place and can control the bleeding. The fracture, what do you use for a fracture? An old box that you may have laying around can be cut up and used as a splint. Just cutting it in a triangle shape or some shape like this, you can bend it into place and you can place the arm in the splint. Using another necktie, you can go ahead and hold it in place. What you would want to remember is that you want to splint it so that you're above the joints. In this case here, we would be above, the splint would go above the elbow, and you come all the way down to the wrist. You want to splint that in there so you would immobilize it, keep it from causing any more damage or pain to your patient. It's also important that you note that you're being calm is reassuring the people around you, especially with children. If you're real panicked or you're screaming or yelling, the people around you are going to pick that up, and all you're going to do is add more confusion. So act as though everything's okay. Act as though you know what's going on. Even if you're scared, reassure people around you. Some other things that you can use that you have around your home are a magazine. A magazine can be used for splinting of a wrist. You also can use towels that you have around. If you have large areas that are bleeding, you can use towels, preferably clean ones, but you want to stop that bleeding. There's a possibility of a broken ankle. You can use a pillow. Carefully lifting it, lay it down in a pillow, wrap the pillow around it, and you can use a necktie. 2 neckties on here that most of us have around the house. Or some tape if you have it. Tape it up to keep this immobile so that your patient won't go through any more pain, and also it will prevent any additional damage. We've covered a lot of information here today on how you can help your neighbor, your loved one, somebody at the office. But what I think is very important for you to remember is that being prepared, having a good first aid kit at home, and you can pick a first aid kit up at your local drugstore, your markets carry them now, and working together, you and your neighbors, work with the PTA, work with the kids being at school. What would you do? How would you get them home? Would the school keep them? How long would they keep them? How about at your office? What are you going to do at your office when the earthquake hits? And again, you'll notice I say when, not if. It's coming. You have to be prepared. In your there's a little brochure inside the tape package that gives you a lot of helpful hints. Use that. Look it over when you're drilling with your family. Consult with the Red Cross on where these classes are that you can take, with the local emergency room, the hospitals. They'll help you. You're going to help yourself. Don't look to me or your local fire department or your local paramedics to come to your house and help you. You're on your own, and your preparation is the most important thing to save you and your family.
Find out what first aid courses are offered in your community. You can consult the Red Cross or your local fire department. The instruction is often free, and your whole family can enroll. Following an earthquake, if you are confronted with an emergency and your phone is working, don't forget the 911 emergency number. However, after a major earthquake, phone lines and emergency services may be overloaded or entirely inoperative, and you may be required to save a life on your own. If you're at home, stay there. If you're at an office or at school, you'll probably want to get home as soon as possible. But remember, telephones and transportation may not be working.
In San Francisco, for example, most people commute many miles to work. But after a quake, bridges and roads may not be passable. Since you may not be able to get home, you should know if your company has an emergency plan for its employees. If it doesn't, you could consider starting one yourself.
I'm sitting here with Dr. Robert Butterworth, a clinical psychologist. Dr. Butterworth has just completed a report called Earthquake Trauma, a guide for children who are still shaking. As you know, this videotape is created for family and individual survival. Seeking out Dr. Butterworth, discussing his program, we did not cover enough of the trauma that the children are going through.
My name is Dr. Robert Butterworth. I'm a California licensed psychologist and president of Contemporary Psychology Associates. During the last earthquake, many parents were so involved with their own fears that they forgot about their children. They didn't want to forget about their children. They just didn't think that children needed to be attended during an earthquake. Parents were involved in their own fears, looking at the damage, talking about what they needed to do. And in many cases, the little ones were forgotten. But after a period of time, these little ones started exhibiting symptoms that parents couldn't ignore. What age group are we talking about? We're talking about youngsters primarily between the ages of 3 and 9. Many of these youngsters have never experienced an earthquake. And they're afraid because they have myths about earthquakes. They're afraid the earth is going to open up and they'll be swallowed up. An example of some techniques that parents can begin to do with their child to get the child to talk about their fears. Let's look at drawing. Crayons, pieces of paper. One child was even afraid to talk about earthquakes, so we started talking about fears. What animal are you afraid of? Oh, I don't like snakes. Let's draw the snake. So by drawing the snake, the child would talk about the snake. Then we had Mommy in the room, and we had Mommy to say, are you afraid of an animal, Mommy? And Mommy said, yes. Well, what are you afraid of? And basically what we did is we had the child, by use of drawing, start talking about their fears. Once they were able to talk about fears, we then led them up to talking about other types of fears. And it came from the drawings of the animals, to the parents talking about the types of things that they were afraid of, to the earthquake situation. These structured exercises can take place in the evening. This is also a good way for parents to talk with their youngster, because many small children can't sit still long enough to talk, but they'll talk while they draw. Another method that we use is puppets. Many children will not talk about their fears. And I can't ask a child, was it scary during an earthquake? But if a child's holding a puppet, I can talk to the child and say, how did this Mr. Lion feel during an earthquake? Was Mr. Lion afraid? And if Mr. Lion's daddy wasn't afraid, what could Mr. Lion's daddy say to Mr. Lion? Again, what we're doing is using creativity, using play to start talking about fears and really, in a way, start talking to children about how to communicate with their parents. Most parents talk at their children. They don't talk with their children. And when a crisis arises, there's no communication channel open. And these techniques that parents can easily do don't take much time and don't take sophisticated equipment. They just take motivation and a willingness to sit down with their child and have fun. The second part of this process is using rewards to get children back to pre-earthquake behavior. For instance, a child is unable to sleep in their room. They're sleeping with Mommy. Mommy doesn't know how to get them out of their room. Well, the worst thing to do is to pull the child out of the bed and force them in their room. What we do is we teach parents how to reward children. For instance, we take the behavior of sleeping with their parents because they're afraid. That's where they are now, and the goal is to get the child in their own room. And we break this down into 10 steps. The first step may mean they still sleep in the bed, but there's a blanket between them and Mommy. 3 days, every day that this happens, that they're able to accomplish this, they get a little reward. After that's accomplished, they may sleep in a cot right next to the bed. If they're able to do that, they're also rewarded. And they have a little chart. You can put it in the refrigerator or in their room, and they get stars, and those stars can be added up for rewards. For instance, one parent said, "You get 25 stars, let's go to Disneyland." So you focus on the days where the child is able to accomplish the behavior, not on the days the child doesn't accomplish the behavior. So as we said before, we're breaking down the steps. We now have the child on a separate small cot next to the bed. We then slowly move them from there 2 feet away. Every night that the child is able to sleep in the parent's room, but 2 feet away, they're rewarded. After that, after a period of time, they move a little bit further, till from being in the room, they're in their own room. This is how we reward people in the industry. This is how we get people to achieve in school. And this is one way that parents can reward their children for the behaviors that they want.
Dr. Butterworth, I would really like to thank you for your time, your patience, to help us complete this videotape project. What we've discussed, the recommendations you've made, your ideas, if it can help us save one child, this entire show is well worth the effort. Thank you very much, Dr. Butterworth.
For future generations capable of predicting earthquakes far in advance and of erecting structures that can withstand even their most torrid shaking, earthquakes may be little more frightening than solar eclipses. Today, they still seem to remind us of the myth that it is not solid ground we live on, but a serpent's shivering spine. Yet we have managed to deal with those shivers in this film. We have learned what to do before, during, and after a quake in order to make ourselves safer. No matter how hard the serpent shivers next time, we'll be ready for him.